thank all you guys. You've been some real troopers here. This is a pretty good sign for freedom that so many people came out on such a beautiful day and listen to speakers talk about America, talk about freedom, so thank you. I want to thank the Oshkosh Patriots for making this day possible, and Matt, thank you. And of course, Michelle, thanks for those very kind comments. Michelle and Rebecca, that's a pretty tough act to follow right there, so. Before I start, though, I do want to acknowledge America lost a real patriot yesterday. Chris Carver lost his battle with cancer. And so I just want to, I know a lot of people here in the audience know Chris. He worked tirelessly for freedom. And I just want to extend our condolences to his wife, Mary, and to his family. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. I had the pleasure of coming back from D.C. I was sequestered there for 3 weeks during the debt ceiling debate. And come back to Wisconsin and travel all over the state for a month. And again, I love being back in Wisconsin, but I tell you, I really hated doing what I did to crowds. I would take a bunch of people with a bunch of smiles on their faces, and then I'd describe the problem, and I'd turn those bright, smiley faces into some real frowns. So I don't want to do that too much today, but I also can't shirk from my duty. My message has been pretty simple. Our financial situation in this country, it's dire. It is urgent. And the second part of my message really is, this is no point in time in our history for people to sit back and expect that somebody else is going to solve the problem for them. It simply won't. I think the result of the debt ceiling debate, that agreement, pretty well proves that. So that's why I'm so pleased to see so many people out here on such a beautiful day. I am going to go through a few numbers, because I think, obviously I'm an accountant, but I think that's really the only way to describe the situation. So I'll kind of start small, and then I'll start building up to the really scary stuff. But let me start just to kind of put our financial situation in perspective. 10 years ago, our federal government spent $1.8 trillion. This year, we'll spend about $3.6 trillion. We've doubled spending in just 10 years. Now, according to President Obama, what he would like to do, the budget that he presented to Congress, which, by the way, it lost 0 to 97 in the United States Senate. And that is a stunning repudiation of his leadership. I mean, if so unserious, it would have added $12 trillion to our nation's debt. But it would have taken our federal budget from $3.6 trillion this year to about $5.7 trillion 10 years in the future. It would have spent $46 trillion over those 10 years. Now, the reason I point that out is I want you to pay attention to what Washington speak is all about. Because you always hear about all these dramatic cuts, these drastic cuts. Well, the House budget would have taken our spending from $3.6 trillion this year to about $4.7 trillion after 10 years. So it's still growing, but the House budget would have spent $40 trillion. So when you hear this $6 trillion worth of cuts, that's all they're talking about. So instead of adding $12 trillion to our nation's debt, the House budget would have added about $6 trillion. But it would have put us on the path towards sustainability. Our federal debt right now stands at $14.7 trillion. Now that wouldn't be a problem if our economy was $100 trillion large, but it's not. Our economy is about $14.7 trillion. And so our debt to GDP ratio is 100%. Now, folks, that's exactly like a family taking a look at how much of a mortgage can you take on when you're buying a house. You have to compare the size of your mortgage, the size of debt that you're incurring, to the level of your income. If you take on too large a mortgage, you go bankrupt. And the sad fact of the matter is America has taken on too big a mortgage, and we are heading toward bankruptcy. I never feared that August 2nd debt ceiling date. There was no way the federal government was going to default on its debt. There's no way that we weren't going to meet every Social Security payment, pay our soldiers, actually meet every obligation of the federal government. What my fear was is the actual day of reckoning. The day when investors all over the world take a look at America and say, I don't think I'm going to loan you any more money. Or what's probably more likely to occur is they'll say, well, I'll loan you money, but at extremely higher interest rates. And you don't have to theorize what that's going to be like, because we can see Greece. When Greece hit their day of reckoning, their debt prices, their debt was $421 billion. That's only 3% of our debt of $14.7 trillion. So it was small enough, it was manageable enough for the European Union to step up and kind of backstop their debt. Nobody can backstop $14.7 trillion worth of debt. And when Greece hit their debt crisis, in a very short period of time, their 3-year note went from 9.3% to 17.7%. Their interest rates skyrocketed by 8.4%. Now, if that were to happen in the U.S., that would add $1.2 trillion to our nation's financing cost. That's a third of our budget. It would wipe out all discretionary spending. It would bankrupt this nation. That's what I fear. We have to avoid that. So the second part of my message is, how do we do it? I mean, we simply cannot rely on the current crop of politicians in Washington. They prove that. You know, the cuts that they were talking about with this debt ceiling debate, the only thing you can sort of call a cut in there is in 30% of our budget. And by the way, that's the only amount of the budget that we actually appropriate, 30%, about $1.05 trillion. The other 70% is all the entitlements. Those are on automatic pilot. They're just growing out of control. But this debt ceiling agreement, where they're saying they cut $917 billion, all the agreement does is take the $1.05 trillion, and next year we'll spend $1.043 trillion. The following year, $1.047 trillion. Then it starts growing. So the way normal human beings take a look at that, the way an accountant, just a guy from Oshkosh, looks at that is, okay, they're cutting $10 billion. That's how much the federal government spends in one day. And of that $10 billion, by the way, we borrowed close to $40 billion, or $4 billion, almost 40%. I mean, folks, we're simply not addressing the problem. So again, you have got to get involved. Now, as I was running for the United States Senate, and even now today when I meet people, come up to me and they say, you know, boy, thank you, God bless you. You're in our prayers, and I can't tell you how much that means to me. But they also say, boy, you're really making a sacrifice. And when people tell me that, I just very quietly kind of lean into them. I go, no. Now, the people that are making a sacrifice are these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. They're stepping up the plate to defend not only our freedom, but they're traveling halfway around the world. They're setting up democracies. They're fighting for the freedom of people whose cultures gave rise to our enemies. And think about how extraordinary that is. The absolute best part of being a United States Senator is the amount of time that I get to spend with the finest among us. A number of weeks ago, I went over to Walter Reed Hospital before they closed it down and transferred it to Bethesda, Maryland, that hospital over there. And I took a tour of the rehabilitation ward. And there were probably about 12 members of the military in there. Soldiers with horribly broken bodies. Unfortunately, a soldier that's relatively whole only is missing a foot. And by the way, the landmines that take off a foot, our soldiers just call those toe ticklers. But there were a number of triple amputees in the rehabilitation ward that day. Their beautiful wives, their children were there, going through the rehabilitation process with them. One of the triple amputees, as I was talking to him, he said, "Sir, when I get done here, I go over to the ward where we welcome the new folks, the new injured. My job is to boost their morale." 2 weeks after I was sworn in, I had an opportunity to go to Afghanistan. And I visited Camp Leatherneck, the Marine base down in the Helmand province, where there's been an awful lot of action, there's been a lot of casualties. And the commanding general, as he was briefing us and kind of summarizing the people under his command, he said, anybody that doubts the current generation, that doubts their capability, their commitment, their mettle, you come to Camp Leatherneck and you meet my fine young Marines. This weekend we are commemorating the 10th anniversary of the terrorist attacks against this nation. It is a solemn time of remembrance. It's a time to remember and mourn. It is a time to remember and reflect. I think it is totally appropriate to remember, to mourn, and honor those whose lives were lost. 2,977 lives were lost on the day of 9/11. And 10,200 individuals have lost their lives as a result of 9/11. Each of those individuals was a mother or a father, a son or a daughter, a husband or a wife. They are missed. In New York, the death toll on 9/11 was 2,419. 343 brave firefighters, over 60 police officers. The Pentagon lost 188 lives. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, United Airlines Flight 93 terminated, and 40 lives were lost. And we all witnessed a remarkable display of American heroism, and many more remarkable displays of American heroism were to follow. Because those young men, the finest among us, stepped up the plate. Young men and women stepped up the plate, and as a result, 6,114 have lost their lives in the conflicts in Iran and Afghanistan. And of those 6,114, 117 have been the proud sons and daughters of Wisconsin. So it is fitting for us to remember, to mourn, and honor all the fallen heroes of 9/11. Let us never forget their sacrifice and the sacrifice of their families. It's also time to remember and reflect. To reflect on the promise that America still holds. Days like 9/11, they're rare moments in the life of a nation. They are moments that are so significant that each and every one of us knows exactly where we were and exactly what we were doing at that moment. Pearl Harbor was one of those moments in the life of my parents. In my lifetime, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the landing of the moon, and now 9/11 are those types of moments. We will never forget 9/11. We should never forget 9/11. But we should also never forget how we felt on September 10th, 2001. We had just experienced a decade of relative peace and prosperity. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The Cold War had ended. There's an author that actually wrote a book called The End of History. And the premise of the book was, now that the Cold War had ended, all great global conflicts would cease. And all we had to look forward to was just sort of managing future prosperity around the world. But then planes hit the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and a field in Shanksville. And our world changed forever. So we will never forget the events of 9/11. But what should give us all hope as we struggle to regain the sense of security that we felt on September 10th is the enduring image of firefighters, police officers, and members of our military who have bravely, voluntarily, and repeatedly walked into harm's way to defend our lives and our freedoms. With citizens like that, we can be confident that a peaceful, prosperous America not only lies in our past, but will also be our future. So God bless the fallen heroes of 9/11. May He bless their families and comfort them. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all.